She hadn't smiled in a week. Then she walked through that front door and something waiting for her on the other side, something her boyfriend had spent his entire day off quietly doing, broke through every wall that an exhausting, unrelenting year had built around her. Not flowers, not a grand dinner, not a dramatic speech. Clean laundry. And when the story of what he did and why he did it and exactly how carefully he did it hit the internet within hours, thousands of women were weeping at their phones. Strangers, women who had never met this man, never met her, never knew their names. Crying, "Let me take you back to where this started." It was July 2020. The world was still on fire. Hospitals were running on fumes. And in an apartment shared by two 25-year-olds, a man named Jake, we'll call him that, was standing at a bathroom sink with his hands in cold water, carefully, deliberately, washing his girlfriend's most intimate garments. She hadn't asked him to. There was nothing in it for him. He just loved her, and she was exhausted, and he had a day off, and he thought, this is what you do. He didn't think it was remarkable. He thought it was just love in its most functional, unglamorous form. He was wrong that it wasn't remarkable, because when he quietly asked Reddit for advice on whether he should even do it and how to do it correctly, what came back wasn't just laundry tips. What came back was the collective, aching cry of a generation of people who had never been loved quite like that, and inside that cry was something uncomfortable, something worth sitting with. This is cold karma. Today we go somewhere quieter, but no less powerful. To understand why this story hit as hard as it did, you have to understand the specific gravity of the moment it was born into. July 2020. If you lived through it, you know what that particular brand of exhaustion felt like, the gray, relentless, low-frequency dread that never quite went quiet. The news was terrible. The uncertainty was constant. And for most people, the challenge was simply enduring, staying home, staying cautious, getting through one more week without knowing when any of it would end. But for healthcare workers, the dread had teeth. His girlfriend, we'll call her Sarah, was a nurse. And in the summer of 2020, being a nurse wasn't just a job. It was a whole body, whole soul commitment that consumed everything it touched. You showed up every shift not knowing what you'd face. You put on layers of protective equipment before you could breathe the same air as your patients. You held hands when families couldn't come in. You absorbed the fear and the grief and the sheer bewildering scale of the suffering, and you kept moving because people needed you to keep moving, because you didn't have the option of stopping, because someone had to do this and you had said, years ago, that you would be that someone. And then you drove home. And the laundry was still there. The dishes were still there. The floors and the surfaces and the pile of hand wash items sitting in the bathroom sink, all of it was there, patient and indifferent, waiting for you to find energy that no longer existed. Sarah, Jake knew, got anxious when their home was messy. Not pathologically, just the quiet stress of someone who felt more grounded in a clean space. A space that had been getting harder and harder to maintain. The mess wasn't laziness. The mess was evidence of everything she was already giving away before she even got home. Jake saw it. He paid attention. And that attention is where this story really begins. Jake also had what they called an essential job in 2020. One of those roles that kept the machinery of daily life running while so much else shut down. He understood hard work. He understood the particular tiredness that accumulates when you've been doing something important and draining for a long time. The two of them weren't living in different realities. They were both deep in the same difficult year, just from different angles. 3 years together, building something, learning each other, and a few months before this story unfolds, they'd taken that next step, they'd moved in together. Which, if you've done it, you know is its own adventure entirely separate from love. The learning of rhythms, the negotiation of space. Who does the dishes, who takes the trash, who cleans what and how often, and how do you build a shared home from two separate lives? They were still in the early part of that, still figuring it out. And Jake had plans. Real ones. He'd been thinking about proposing for a while now. He'd set a plan in motion, a vacation. Peru, June, the kind of trip you spend months anticipating, the kind of backdrop that turns a question into a story you tell for the rest of your lives. He'd had it mapped out in his head. The moment, the place, the ring. COVID canceled it. Their vacation days were pulled. The trip disappeared. The proposal quietly went back into the drawer. And instead of a romantic milestone, there was just more work, more weeks, more of an already exhausting year asking both of them to keep going. So when Jake found himself with a few days off, actual, genuine days where he wasn't needed anywhere, he made a decision. He was going to do something for her. He was going to clean their entire apartment while she was at work, not because she'd asked. Not because he was keeping some internal ledger. because he knew, specifically and practically, that coming home to a clean space would remove one layer of stress from someone who was carrying too many layers already. He was going through every room. He was going to do this right. The plan was going beautifully, until he reached the bathroom sink. He found them in and around the bathroom sink. Her hand wash items, underwear, bras, garments she'd been carefully washing by hand for as long as she'd owned them, the way you're supposed to with delicates, gentle soap, cold water, careful handling, because that's how you make good things last. Except lately, she hadn't been doing it. Lately, anything beyond the bare minimum of daily survival had been more than she had left to give. She was almost out of clean ones. Jake stood in that doorway and did something quietly remarkable. He thought about it. He didn't recoil. He didn't decide it wasn't his problem. He stood there and genuinely, seriously, considered whether this was something he could do for her. And more importantly, and this is the part that matters, he considered it from her perspective, not his. His question wasn't, do I want to do this? His question was, would doing this make her feel cared for? Or would it make her feel exposed? Because here's what was in that sink. Period stains, discharge. The perfectly ordinary, entirely involuntary, completely unglamorous evidence of a woman's body doing what women's bodies do. And Jake's reaction wasn't disgust. His reaction was essentially, this needs to be cleaned, she needs clean underwear, I have time and 2 hands. Should I do this? That's a genuinely interesting place for a 25-year-old man to land. Not ugh. Not that's her job. Not a wrinkled nose or a retreat to the living room. Just a practical, compassionate question, followed immediately by the more important one. How do I do this in a way that doesn't embarrass her? He sat with it. He turned it over. He thought about her dignity and her feelings and what she'd want. He was, by his own admission, new to all of this first real relationship, first few months of living together, and he genuinely didn't know what the right call was, so he did the sensible thing. He went on Reddit and asked the internet. His post was simple, earnest. It practically radiated good faith through the screen. He laid everything out plainly. Girlfriend is a nurse, she's been exhausted, he was surprising her with a full apartment clean, he found her hand wash items, he wanted to include them in the gesture. They'd only been living together a few months, and this was all new to him. He said directly that the stains didn't bother him, he understood these were natural things, and his only concern was that she might feel embarrassed knowing he'd handled them. He asked women and people in relationships what they thought he should do. The internet, to its occasional credit, showed up beautifully. The top comment walked him through the entire process. Cold water, not hot, hot water sets protein-based stains permanently, and you'll never get them out. A good soak. Gentle soap. No wringing. Wringing is hard on delicate fabrics and defeats the whole point of hand washing. Squeeze instead, then roll in a dry towel to pull out moisture before hanging or laying flat to dry. A complete, practical, warm tutorial from a stranger who had been moved enough by the question to answer it thoroughly. And then she added, "You're a good partner. She's lucky to have you." Another woman responded that her concern wouldn't be embarrassment, it would be him accidentally ruining items she cared about. Not I'm horrified he'd touch them, but I'd want him to know the technique. Which is a kind of unsentimental, pragmatic trust that's actually more intimate than a lot of people realize. Ask first, so she can brief you properly and stop worrying about them. A third commenter, and this one I love, wrote to Jake with a warmth that read almost like something a proud grandmother might say. She wrote, "Oh honey, you are doing so good. You keep chugging away doing what you're doing, and I think things should work out just fine. You seem like a really sweet man. Good luck going forward, and I hope you both have long, happy lives together." A total stranger on the internet moved to that kind of tender, maternal warmth by a 25-year-old man asking how to wash his girlfriend's underwear without messing them up. Let that sink in for just a moment. He took the advice to heart. The consensus was clear, ask first, so he picked up his phone and sent Sarah a text. He explained what he'd been planning the whole cleaning surprise and that he'd found her hand wash items and wanted to include them in it. He asked if that was okay with her. She responded, and her response is the emotional center of this entire story. I want you to stay with it for a moment because there's a lot packed into a short sentence. She said, "Thank you. That would be really nice, but you don't have to. I know most guys find it grody, so it's okay, I can do it myself. I know most guys find it grody." Say those words slowly. Let them land. She didn't write that as a complaint. She wrote it as a kindness, a preemptive kindness toward him, a releasing of him from an obligation she had already assumed he wouldn't want. She was making herself smaller, making her needs smaller, packaging her own discomfort into something tidy and manageable that she could carry back to herself so he wouldn't have to deal with it. And the phrase, "I know most guys," those aren't hypothetical words. That's not someone imagining a bad response. That's someone who has received bad responses, specific ones, personal ones, from people who were supposed to love her and chose instead to make her feel ashamed of something she had no control over. Jake had mentioned in his post that she'd had rough experiences with previous boyfriends, that they'd been grossed out, that they'd made her feel bad. And in those 5 words, "I know most guys," you can hear the exact shape of what that had cost her. Years of quiet apology. Years of managing other people's discomfort about her own body. Years of pre-shrinking herself so that nobody had to confront the fact that she was a living human woman with a living human body. She had pre-apologized for herself to a man who had already learned the correct water temperature. He started soaking her underwear in cold water. No speech, no grand announcement, no "I want you to know I don't actually mind." He just filled the sink with cold water and gentle soap, exactly like the Reddit thread had taught him, and started carefully working through each garment, treating them the right way. Cold water for the stains, because hot water sets them and you'll never get them out. No wringing, squeeze, then roll in a towel. Gentle, deliberate, doing it right because she deserved it done right. And while her delicates soaked, he kept cleaning the rest of the apartment. Everything he had promised himself he was going to do, because this wasn't only about the underwear anymore. The underwear had become part of something larger, a statement he was making in the only language that mattered. Action. Think about what was happening in that moment. She had sent him a text that said, essentially, "You don't have to. I already expect less than this." And his response wasn't words. It wasn't a reassuring reply telling her that he didn't mind, "Don't worry about it, you're not gross." His response was filling a sink with cold water. His answer was, "I know I don't have to. I want to, and I'm going to do it correctly." He had also, somewhere in the week before all of this, noticed that her heating pad had broken. He hadn't said anything about it at the time. He just filed it away, gone and gotten her a new one, and added it to what he was planning to leave for her today. Another small thing. Another proof of payment, of the kind of attention that doesn't need to announce itself because it doesn't need the credit. By the time her underwear was hanging to dry and her bras were soaking in the sink, the apartment was spotless. The heating pad was waiting. The whole place felt, for the first time in weeks, like a home that someone had taken care of. Not because it had to be done. Because someone loved the person who lived in it. He went back to Reddit to post a quick update, and that's when the world showed up. The post blew up, and not in the slow, gradual way things sometimes build on the internet. Fast, within hours. Comments flooding in, awards stacking up, people sharing it across platforms. And the responses weren't what you might expect from a story about laundry. They weren't just, "Aw, that's nice." They were something rawer, more urgent. The kind of response you get when a piece of content accidentally hits something that a lot of people had been carrying around quietly for a long time without a name for it. Women were saying they'd cried reading the post. Not because it was sad, because they'd never been treated this way. Because the bar, the absolute floor, for what a caring partner looked like, had apparently dropped to a place where a man who asked Reddit for hand-washing tips because he wanted to protect his girlfriend's dignity was now an aspirational figure. A standard that people were forwarding to their partners. A benchmark for what love could look like that, for thousands of commenters they had genuinely never witnessed up close. Stop and feel that for a second. The bar, the minimum threshold of basic decency between people who claim to love each other, had somehow sunk to a place where this, thoughtful, practical, quiet, correct, was enough to make strangers weep. Mothers said they were sending it to their sons. Partners said they were forwarding it to their significant others. Women said they'd never had this, never expected to have this, weren't sure they'd believed it was actually possible before reading this thread. And woven through almost every comment was this quiet, devastating undercurrent. "I didn't know someone could love you this way. I didn't know it was allowed to be this simple, this unglamorous, this real." Jake read all of it. He was clearly moved by the scale of the response, but he handled it with the same quiet grace he'd been showing all day. He went through the comments carefully, giving out awards to the ones that had helped or touched him, and then he posted an update that I think says everything about who this person is. He said he was heartbroken. That was the word he used. Heartbroken by how many people had commented to say they'd cried, or that they wished they had someone like this, or that they'd never experienced love like this. And then he did something that I don't think many 25-year-olds or many people of any age, frankly, would think to do in that moment. He apologized, on behalf of men who had let women down in that department. Not defensively, not with a lengthy disclaimer, not making it about himself. Just, I'm sorry this has been so many people's experience. You deserved better, all of you deserved better, but not everyone was moved. Of course they weren't. Because this is the internet, and a certain kind of person cannot see someone modeling a version of humanity they find threatening without reaching for something small and sharp. Jake mentioned in his final update that he'd had moments of regretting posting because people had messaged him privately to insult him, to be gross about it, to question his masculinity, his intelligence, his dignity, his everything for the crime of washing laundry carefully. And I want to name those people, not to dwell on them, but because they matter to the story. Because those insults came from exactly the same place that had produced Sarah's previous boyfriends, the same worldview, the same rigid, cramped, defensive little corner of masculinity that had taught women like Sarah to pre-shrink themselves and pre-apologize for their bodies before someone else could make them feel ashamed first. The same machinery that had worn those 5 words into her, I know most guys like grooves into stone. Jake's response to those messages was short and precisely right. He said, "With all the support, I'm standing by what I said. If someone has a problem with it, they can deal with it themselves. No extended defense. No argument. No attempt to win anyone over. Just quiet, immovable, 25-year-old certainty that he had done the right thing. That the right thing was obvious. And that the opinions of people who needed to insult him for it said nothing about him and everything about them." And then he waited for Sarah to come home. She came home, and his final update, the last thing he posted that day, is only a few sentences long. He didn't need more. He wrote that she came home to a clean apartment and all her underwear clean. He wrote that she was really happy. And then he wrote the line that is, for me, the entire point of everything that came before it. The line that makes the Reddit thread and the cold water and the no-ringing technique and the hours of cleaning and the viral response and the insults and the standing firm, it makes all of it make sense. He wrote, "First time I've seen her smile in a week, so that made me happy." That's it. That's the whole story. First time she'd smiled in a week. Sit with what it means to be the person who brings that back. To watch someone you love slowly dim under the weight of a relentless year. To see it happening. To feel helpless against the scale of what's exhausting them. And then to see in an ordinary Tuesday afternoon the specific, practical opportunity to give them one moment of relief. One moment where they walk through the door and the weight lifts, just slightly, just enough. One moment of viscerally, physically feeling that someone spent their day thinking about what they needed. There are grand gestures. Vacations and rings and candlelit proposals in foreign countries with perfect lighting. And there's this. A scrubbed sink, underwear on a drying rack, a new heating pad sitting on the counter. A man who paid attention to small things and acted on what he noticed, without fanfare, without needing it witnessed, without any audience except the one that mattered. Jake, somewhere in that clean and quiet apartment, was planning to get down on one knee and ask her to marry him. The Peru trip had been canceled. June had come and gone, but it didn't matter. Because that Tuesday, that ordinary, unremarkable, extraordinary Tuesday, had already answered the real question. Not will you marry me, the more important one, the one that takes years to answer. The one that says, do you see me? Are you paying attention? Will you stay? She walked through that door. She saw what he'd done. And she smiled. This story carries a kind of karma, but it's not the explosive, table-flipping, watch-them-crumble kind we often talk about on this channel. It's slower than that. Quieter, more sustainable. The kind that compounds over time and pays out in ways that are harder to photograph, but more real than anything spectacular. The men who had shamed Sarah, who had made her feel lesser for having a body that worked like a body, those men lost something. They lost a woman who was worth loving well. They forfeited their place in her story through their own smallness. And the evidence of what they'd done lingered in her language, in the muscle memory of pre-apology, in those 5 automatic words, I know most guys, and their karma, they went on to live inside that same cramped worldview. The one where bodily reality is shameful, where care is weakness, where the measure of a man is his ability to stay distant and unbothered, where love comes with conditions and exceptions, and intimacy is allowed only up to the point where it becomes inconvenient, where you end up old and defended and alone and fundamentally incapable of the kind of love that makes someone smile after a week of not smiling. Jake, meanwhile, went on to make his girlfriend smile for the first time in 7 days. Went on to receive the genuine gratitude of thousands of strangers who needed to see what care looked like. Went on to stand firm against insults from small people and come out the other side with his dignity perfectly intact. And went on to plan a proposal to a woman for whom he had spent a random Tuesday learning the correct water temperature for washing delicates. That's not a small life. That's a good one. And there's something else worth sitting with. The response to this post, the weeping, the I've never had this, the collective ache of people who recognized what they hadn't been given, that didn't come from a tragedy. It came from a laundry tip, from cold water and gentle hands and someone asking, how do I do this right? And then doing it. The bar for decent love isn't high, friends. It's just apparently rarely cleared. And when someone clears it, quietly on a Tuesday, without an audience, the internet cries, which tells you everything you need to know about how hungry people are for proof that love can actually be this simple. If this story did something to you, if it landed somewhere, made you think, made you want to be a little more like Jake and a little less like the people who sent him insults, then you're exactly the kind of person this channel exists for. Cold karma isn't only about the explosive moments. It's not just about watching the entitled get exactly what they deserve, although, don't worry, there's plenty of that. It's also about this, the quieter karmas, the slow, accumulating returns of being decent when decency is hard, the justice of someone who was taught to expect less finally getting more, the cold water that removes what shame tried to make permanent. It's about paying attention to what the world owes people and noticing when, quietly, unexpectedly, without fanfare, it finally delivers. Jake and Sarah are out there somewhere. She smiled that day. He was happy because she smiled. And somewhere in their future, there's a proposal that got delayed, rerouted, and recalibrated by the hardest year most people had lived through. That's going to happen at exactly the right time, in exactly the right way, for two people who already know without any doubt what the other one is made of. That's a proposal that doesn't need Peru. That doesn't need a perfect backdrop. Because the answer was already written on a Tuesday in July, in an apartment that smelled like clean laundry. If this story was worth your time today, if it gave you something, drop a like on your way out. It takes 2 seconds, it costs you nothing, and it genuinely helps more people find this channel and find these stories. Subscribe if you want more. We post regularly, and every story we choose is chosen because it has something real to say, something that stays with you. And if you have a story, something that happened to you, something you witnessed, some moment where you watched the world finally give someone what they'd always deserved, the link is in the description. Every story we've ever told came from someone willing to share it. Take care of the people you love. Notice the small things. Ask how to do it right. And always, always use cold water. I'll see you in the next one.